Well, let's get started. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Jamin Warren. I run Kill Screen. I'm really excited about this. We haven't done one of these in a really long time, like a live talk. I used to do them all the time. And we used to do this great conference where we bring people from inside and outside of games. Chaim and I have been talking, gosh, for the last like 18, like a year and a half, about doing something. And Konstantinos, very thoughtfully is joining us today. So this talk today is a conversation called "What Do Game Cities Want?" I'll give a brief bio for each of the two of you, and then I'll just kind of open. You can have the two of you talk about a little bit about your background as well. Konstantinos was born in Athens, Greece, where he studied to become a rural and surveying engineer with a focus on infrastructure and urbanism at NTUA, and then earned a master's on urban and regional planning. In 2010, Konstantinos received a PhD in urban planning and geography. Since 2002, he has worked as an engineer, researcher, lecturer, while publishing papers and continuing to contribute to scientific publications, and also has a great Substack all about game urbanism that you can subscribe to as well. Chaim is the author of Building SimCity, How to Put the World in a Machine, which Stuart Brand called one of the best origin stories ever told and the best account has ever been seen of how innovation actually occurs in computerism. Gingold began his career as an apprentice to Will Wright. I'm sure we'll talk about Will Wright throughout this conversation, where his big accomplishment was working on the critically acclaimed Spore creature creator. Chaim's work has been featured in Wired, CNN, and the New York Times. I'm really excited to have both of you. Maybe to get started, I guess for each one of you, how did you first get interested in game city, like game urbanism, game cities, like looking at cities in games? Because games do a lot of different types of things. You get invested in the characters, you can get invested in the stories. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach games, and approaching them through the lens of the constructed environments inside of them is very specific. So yeah, maybe Jaime, if you want to go first, and then Konstantinos tell a little bit about how you got to focusing on that.
That's a great question. I'm thinking about playing SimCity when I was, I don't know, 10 years old or something like that. But like I lived in a city in West Virginia, but not a big city. And I'm thinking that like I just spent a lot of time like building with this like all the Legos dumped out on the floor. You know, just build these like giant like sprawling Lego worlds. Basically, they were like cities. And um, like I definitely was super into the David Macaulay books as a kid. Kind of like the
Yeah,
ones
those are
that not
great.
just the way things work, but like I remember having like I'm one of my mom's friends will put like we got out a shoebox and was like, let's build a building, right? So I think there's just something kind of basic about building cities out of play materials. Um, Maybe that's just a condition of being a child in an urban environment.
Yeah.
So I guess if I have to pick an origin, I think that's probably it. It's like living in it and playing with it and making it.
Yeah, I heard in another interview had done. You've talked about like trying to encourage imaginative play with your kids. I have a 4-year-old, so we think about that a lot. She has a dollhouse, like trying to keep her away from screens in some ways to kind of
Yeah.
encourage that piece, and with an eye towards like she'll have plenty of time to plenty of time to play video games for the rest of her life. And
This is exactly how we feel with our kids. We're like, just you don't need any screens. You're gonna be stuck behind a screen into your
yeah,
future.
the screen is your mind. The screen is inside of your head.
Totally.
Konstantinos, how about for you? How did you first get interested in this question of cities inside of games?
I would say that it sort of came naturally. What with me working as an urbanist and also, doubling in writing for games and writing about games, and also being part of an indie studio. At some point, I realized that there is a very interesting overlap, and that urbanistic knowledge and geographic knowledge and all those things can contribute to creating more interesting places. And it was in reality as simple as that.
Hmm.
There.
Yeah. No, I mean it's the places that you go. I think that's always like an interesting thing in terms of like thinking about games as a lens for that. Well, I think that the first question and this will be for you, Konstantinos. Um, games treat cities as backdrops, as as sets, and what do you feel like is actually missing when a designer thinks of a city as like an arrangement of buildings rather than a functioning systems? I'm sure we played lots of games that are like that, where like it feels like it needs to have a city environment. There happen to be buildings in the place. There may not be thought and care. What are some of the common things that you see that get left out of that process of building cities?
Well, I mean, I have to start by admitting that sometimes leaving things out is unavoidable
Okay.
due to the actual realities of building everything. But there are some tendencies. I mean, it's very rare for us to see public spaces that are not just streets. It's very rare for games to take advantage of that. It's which is actually quite a bit of a lost opportunity. I mean, a square can be a fantastic place. A park can be fascinating and packed with life. And generally speaking, this whole life and functioning society aspect of actual urban reality tends to be missing in many cities in games. And I imagine that this is not so much of an oversight, but more of a technical thing, more of a matter of cost, probably. I mean, Cyberpunk did attempt to create this sense of the crowd in the city, which I would say it's a very very important aspect of its image. And other than that, occasionally, people forget that cities are historical places and they're not, this snapshot in time, that they need to feel dynamic, that they need to showcase the fact that they have been around for a while. An older building, something under construction. Those are very, very simple things that are often forgotten. And also, and I imagine that this has to do with where most games are created. There is a disturbing lack of topography. I mean, many game cities are effectively flat, which is quite weird. Quite weird. Unless you live in Central Europe, I imagine.
Yeah.
I, can I jump? I'm just thinking about like to counterexample or like whatever. So maybe an exceptional example is Jet Grind Radio, which is like actually like one of my favorite games. I think, and it's like it's from Japan, right? And I think about the public spaces in there, and it's like you're sort of skating around, and there's these crowds of people just kind of hanging out, and they all like jump out of the way, and it's kind of the pleasure, part of the pleasure of it. And it's just making me think about that sort of like you're saying about the sort of who makes the games, like and what gets represented in it, but also the quality of travelogue and how important that is. I'm just thinking like on my own personal life, like having been fortunate to go and visit like Los Angeles where my mom grew up, and then go to Paris where where one of my grandparents are from, and other cities, and all the cities I visit in games like Final Fantasy. I think that's part of the spark of interest for me, I think, and like making me read more, and think about them more. Going to Tokyo,
Yeah, because truth be said, if we approach game cities as something to be visited besides something that we're meant to be playing in, they can offer a different scale of enjoyment, a different level of enjoyment, really. And for them, though, to be able to do that, there has to be some thought poured into things. I mean, as Jamin said before, I mean, if you really treat them as environments, as just something that's there to fill in space, then you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to take the time and look into the details and sort of try to imagine living there and have this sense of walking in a new place, which is always exciting, even if it's a virtual place.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out, I was living in New York, and my wife is from Los Angeles, and she hadn't spent a lot of time playing video games, and we started playing it together. I think it was really surreal for her to see the way the city is depicted kind of in miniature. And now living here in Los Angeles, I do realize how much of the like figuratively that game it captures so many elements of like Southern California, in the same way that like a film like One Battle After Another is very much a love letter to California. It captures all of these different pieces of California, from Anza Borrego to Humboldt County to like Oakland. And I think that's the idea of games as places that you can go, even if you can't go in real life, that they should offer some kind of perspective on the place, the actual place, both for people who live there and also maybe for people who never get a chance to visit as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting balance too. I mean, do you want to be banal and just reference what's well known and reference what the popular culture of a place is, and that's provided you are tackling a city based in reality, or do you want to also showcase those tiny nook and crannies that make things so interesting, that actually bring a place to life, that actually, give a place its real character and not the, postcard character, if you want.
Yeah. Um, Konstantinos, I guess for Chaim as well, like you've written about urban functions like commerce,
Hmm.
housing,
Hmm.
transportation. I think I get the sense sometimes that game makers approach cities just in those physical environments, like these are the buildings as opposed to the systems that like undergird them. Even if you're not making like a simulation style game, there's still an idea that like even in in any in any universe, there's still someone has to like take out the trash, and there's still municipal government. Those things are like all implied. Um, Tell me about that. Like, what are some of the game? Like, what are some of the systems that you feel like games often like leave out? You mentioned lack of crowds and the sort of the topography, but can you talk a little bit about the functions of a city that
Yeah.
players should be looking for that make them come alive?
I think that functions are a very, very helpful way to approach cities when designing them. I mean, when you try to think of what people need to be doing at a specific place, that helps you actually not forget crucial things. Like, people have to move around. People have to be able to live someplace. People have to be able to get access to water and all those things that we need in order to have a functioning society that's relatively healthy and perhaps even um, hopeful in doing things that entertain itself. Good. So if you forget functions, if you do things like very mechanically and don't really care about what goes into the reality of a city, you tend to create places that feel a bit like, I don't know, Disneyland, something like that. I mean, you have this obvious sense that this is a made up place. This is a place that could easily be plastic and just a facade, like a Potemkin village through which you just cruise. So I think that's better avoided. And there's also the added thing that functions can do is that they really add legibility. I mean, people do not actually walk around thinking about what this thing does and what we are doing right now, but they almost instinctively have grown to understand it. They know what to expect. They know that crowds are moving to the square, in their lunch breaks to eat something, and kids will be at the playground, after school. Those sorts of simple things, which we don't really think about, are what can lend this real sense of authenticity to a place. Again, I absolutely realize that they cannot always be modeled, uh, but there's always the option of being symbolic about how you approach those elements of urbanism. Just, and I'm thinking about Warren Spector's Deus Ex. So he didn't go on and ask his team to model thousands of homeless people in future dystopian New York. He just showcased five around the barrel, and you instantly get the idea of, okay, this thing exists.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah, you don't need a ton of the like you don't need
Hmm.
so many things, but enough to encourage and players do fill in the you fill in the negative space there of what's implied by the existence of certain characters there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, again, to use a Grand Theft Auto example, gosh, I'd finished a heist in like Grand Theft Auto 4 or something like that, and I jumped out of a plane and I had a parachute and I landed next to a prison. I'll never forget this. There was like a gardener. It was just like a gardener as I land at the end of this mission. It was like mission accomplished, whatever. And there's just like this gardener kind of like doing their thing as this guy's just like landed with a parachute with a big sack of cash. And that was like such a moment for me. I know it was procedural, just happened to be there, but it spoke so much about this kind of for me as a player. I'm like, there's this whole other universe of things that are happening, and I, as like a crazy outlaw, is adding this like level of chaos, and there's just like people going about their daily lives, just kind of doing whatever. How do you have for you as a player? Do you have like a I don't know, like when you play games, I guess that have like city environments, is there one notable absence for you as a city function? You're like, hey, this feels like it should exist. Do you turn that part of your brain on when you're playing games with city environments?
I mean, I feel like sort of thinking about the difference between like SimCity and Final Fantasy. It's like one of them, I expect the urban infrastructure and the infrastructure of the city, the pipes and electricity,
Right.
to be the thing that I'm engaged with. And in others, if I'm thinking about again, I'm dating myself, like Final Fantasy VII. It's like that, like really dense, I forget the name of that city, but that the whole, most of the plot, I think, unfolds in one urban environment, one super dense urban environment. And it's like the character, it's like the specific texture and character of that place and the detail and the gnarliness of it is what makes it so that like, it's like that immersion and the specificity of that fantasy world. So I think it depends. And I was joking over email with you guys about like Rampage. I was like, Rampage is such a great classic game. You just like, the city is just these buildings you climb up and you just like punch the buildings and they fall down, and you like, I think you could eat people, right? It's like, and they run away, and like that's it. Like that's the city, and it's like it's the perfect urban environment for that game. So it made me think about like the hotels and motels and Monopoly. It's like, yeah, that's kind of a city too, I guess, but it is, right? But it's like it serves the game, but is there a public space? I guess there's free parking. I mean, like it's like, what is?
Well,
like, there's just like these are it's like it's kind of it's like
silhouettes.
Yeah. It's like the psychological versus it's like the psychological immersion features versus the sort of functional game mechanics versus some hybrid that's like both. Like SimCity's features are somehow both game mechanics and city mechanics, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about SimCity. I think that would be a good natural seg. Can you tell me a bit about what I mean? You've spent so much time with this, like personally, professionally. Like you'd be hard pressed to find another person who knows more about the game and its origin. Can you tell me, what do you think makes SimCity like special as an object? What made it like stand out? And you can kind of go through also the argument. It's sort of the core argument for your book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was thinking about this. Like, I think that you look at the advertising, like the box for SimCity, the original city, and one of the main things they lean into is like the city is alive, like the living city, like in your computer. So it's like this toy world that's alive, and I think that really was the like probably the most single distinctive feature of SimCity, which is that it was animated. It was all the simulated detail. Cars moved, the buildings would develop, smoke would come out of the smokestacks. There was fires that would like unfold across the map. It was this super detailed simulation. And you look at, it was interesting is like that seems like also something that Will Wright just kind of did. Like you look at his first game right on Bungling Bay, and that was one of the things that the early reviewers noted was just how detailed that whole world was that you played in. And that first game he made, you pilot, it was like it was a shooter, like you piloted a helicopter over this semi-urban landscape blowing stuff up, but it was simulated with all this detail. And I think that in addition to that, all that detail was the scale of it. Like it's just huge, like for the time, right? Like you'd scroll around this giant map and it was like alive everywhere. So you'd be scrolled way off screen, like stuff is still happening. It's not a trick, like it really is. And I think that was really a tremendous technical design accomplishment, and people really felt that. And I think both of those things, that scale and that massive detail and aliveness is exactly, I think that's very intrinsic to what a city is, right? Like these sprawling, dense places that are filled with all of this parallel activity. And I think that's the same kind of those are the similar qualities that impress people later about Grand Theft Auto, which is another game. I think it's very notable game about the city. So it was like the detail, the autonomy of the world. You could land your parachute in the middle of nowhere and there'd be a gardener, trimming the hedges, and that's that massive parallel aliveness. So I think that computers are good at simulation, but computers I think are also especially good at parallel simulation. It's just traditionally been harder to program that.
Yeah.
And I'll just add two other notes is that SimCity puts the player in the sort of godlike position, which is not unusual for a game, but I think that sort of that juxtaposition of that giant living world with that godlike positionality is like what made it so engaging for people. And plus it's silly. It's got all this like very serious technical stuff, like the zoning and the tax rates, but like there's this Godzilla, this Godzilla-like monster.
Right.
It revels in the thrill of destruction. It's very playful. I think that is like a very Will Wright sort of design sensibility. And I think that people was like serious but silly. And that also I think is very a key quality of it.
Yeah. Can you walk me through the argument in Building SimCity? I mean, it's a really fascinating book, and that's broken up into kind of these three. Not that you necessarily conceived of it this way, but it's kind of like broken up into these sort of three chapters where you go through the history of simulation. You talk about some of the business structure and environment for Maxis as a company, and then a deeper dive like into the design of SimCity. Can you just the thing that was most interesting to, I think, to me was like the web of like influences. So can you kind of just like walk through the kind of that trajectory of SimCity and maybe how the interdisciplinary context for it made it really stand out, which I think maybe is part of the, maybe ultimately is like part of that appeal.
Totally. Yeah. I think that, so I guess one of the key arguments I make is that, so Will Wright didn't just sit down and say, I'm going to make a game about a city and just like write a bunch of code and simulate this incredible city model. He built upon a lot of different work that was done over many, many decades, actually. So he borrowed from many different simulation traditions. One of them is this tradition called Cellular Automata. The Game of Life, Conway's Game of Life, is the most famous example of that. And it's very good at these rippling spatial simulations that are just really dazzling to the eye. So and are really entwined with questions about what is life, how do you simulate life. So it's really really like the question of aliveness is really important to that tradition. And then there's another tradition he built upon from Jay Forrester's work, system dynamics, and there's Game of Life. So in Jay Forrester's system dynamics work, so Forrester actually worked on, in the 1940s, this computer called Whirlwind that was the first interactive, like real-time digital programmable computer. Like all these, like if you have enough qualifiers, it's first. But it's a very important early computer, and it was actually used and eventually was used as part of. It came out of a tradition of flight simulators for the military during World War II. But Forrester, after World War II ends, he then pivots his career to the MIT's new School of Business, and he starts looking at how to simulate social systems with computers. And then he eventually simulates like individual firms and eventually gets to cities and gets to the whole world. And a lot of these simulation models, like his urban model was one that was like, it got a lot of popular media attention. Like it was like one of the most famous simulations of its time in this early 70s. And and it's contemporaneous with like the crisis of the cities of the early 70s. There's like all these civil rights, uprisings. The Watts uprising is happening. It's very much of these simulations are very much of their moment. And Will Wright, and Forrester's work gives SimCity its sort of, if Cellular Automata give it its bottom up texture in a sense, System Dynamics gives it this sort of top down cohesion, the overall economic structure that ties residential to commercial to industrial demand that gives the whole city kind of cohesive form. And there's a whole lot of ideology people have critiqued, like embedded in, I would say, both of these models. And Will Wright had to put his own spin on it. So he's adopting all these different simulation traditions, plus doing a lot of his own research. And he's also smashing it together with the graphical user interface and video games, both of which are relatively new mediums at the time, right? SimCity is released in 1989. So the Macintosh doesn't come out. Apple Mac comes out in 1984. So it's like people are just getting used to the graphical user interface, and SimCity kind of like is able to put these complex simulations that were traditionally for specialists in the hands of everybody. And he's able to use video game design tropes, and that's kind of where that silliness of Godzilla, the playfulness of it, the sort of clarity, that toy-like legibility of SimCity sort of also come into it. So he kind of, so part of what's so fascinating about this, I guess my key argument is that, so he makes something that is like an amazingly fun and interesting object, but also it speaks to all of these different communities whose work is sort of shows up inside of SimCity. So the people that are still doing Cellular Automata work, like the people at the Santa Fe Institute, which are key players in the rise of emergent systems thinking, they are super into Will Wright's work. And then the people, the urban planners, are also very interested in Will Wright's work. And so there's all these feedback loops of attentional loops. And then venture capitalists who see what Will Wright is doing and are familiar with Jay Forrester's work say, aha, like maybe we can make a simulation. If Will Wright can make cities fun and interesting, that's a complex system. Maybe we can maybe other corporations start to think, oh, maybe we can get Will Wright to make a game about like an oil refinery, right? And that's like becomes Sim Refinery, which is this, I don't know if that was ever released, but it was a project, it was like done for Chevron. And so they start to do these business simulations at some point for corporate clients, right? So it just kind of takes Maxis on all these interesting directions.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like there's like a core, like if you were to distill Will Wright, is there like a core question that he was chasing? It's interesting that, I mean, one of the things I think is interesting about Will Wright also is just there's so few game designers that work successfully over a long period of time. I mean, as a sad consequence of games is that people kind of have this window where they make something really resonant, and then that window kind of closes and they're not really able to transition. And that does make games, I think, sadly, maybe different from other creative professions where you do see people who their output continues for better or worse. I mean, yeah, Francis Ford Coppola is like still like made like a bomb of a movie at the tail of like, but he's still like making things, and so, but if you could distill like Will Wright like as a thinker into like a single question, what do you feel like that question is that he's kind of been asking through all of the different things like in his work? I know it's a big question, but yeah.
I think that I think about he has a few distinctive characteristics. One of them is that he's very curiosity driven in his interests and his work. So I think he's like an artist or a researcher in this regard. He just kind of gets obsessed with subjects and just goes super deep into them. And that's part of what gives his work that, that like depth and that specificity. So whether it's like, ants, like Sim Ant later, or, SimCity, like, and then once he does one, like when he does SimCity, he doesn't want to ever do another SimCity game again, though he's forced to because of the, the commercial requirements, the constraints of operating a company.
And
then later the Sims. I think another thing is that he is actually less interested in, I think, games as a medium, as computing, I think, is the medium that he's interested in. And games are, as he once described to me, are a kind of opportunity within that medium to design for. So I think a lot of his work sort of just is not fit neatly into the game category. And that's part of what actually makes it so evocative for people. But at the same time, he's very informed. He's an extremely playful character, perhaps the most playful character I've met in my life. I don't know. Like, it's hard. It's like he's just as a person, as a designer, he's just an extremely playful guy, right? In a very deep way. Just kind of, like superficially too, but just kind of, it's just this puckishness about him.
And
I think that shows up in his work.
No, it's interesting to hear. Like, these questions about like curiosity, and then also, I mean, this longer tradition of like using games as a way to explore some other question. There's thankfully like a long history of games being the mechanism by which, virtual reality or like social networks, or I mean, just so many different things, artificial intelligence, like there's just so many ways that games have been like a playground for like deeper ideas, and you end up in interesting places. I think, if you have that mindset that games are not so unserious that they can't generate very like serious inspiration one way or another.
Yeah, and I think this is like one of the paradoxical things is that it's like he's almost like Will's almost like a serious games guy, except that he's also like the most playful, silly game, also like such a silly person, right? Like, the work is so silly as well, and I think that's so he's like deploying the sort of the ideas and tools of science in this like pop culture register that's like just irreverent, right? I think that's part of what makes it work.
Konstantinos, so I'd be curious, like your read on SimCity, like as someone with, it is one of these games I think that people point to. It's like, oh, it's a game about that must be applicable for urban planners, or it must be. So I'm curious, like your read on SimCity, your interactions with the game, and I don't know if your thinking on the game has changed as you dive deeper into like game urbanism.
Well, truth be said, I do love SimCity, and I especially love SimCity 2000, which is the one I played the most.
Same here.
Getting the original to run on my ancient computer, even at the time, was nigh on impossible. Now, the thing is that I've always seen it as a game, as something that's fantastic. It's like being able to play with this huge model of a city. You look at it from above and you see all the little things moving around, and it's very fun, very entertaining. I do feel that though it's not obviously capable of, say, educating urban planners, it certainly more than capable of giving people a rough idea of what planning is about, of what cities are made of. So I mean, there's no point in critiquing, the actual models, or the assumptions, or the things that go into it, because I don't think they matter. I mean, what matters is that people understand that, okay, this is not just a bird's eye view, this is a planner's view. You look at things from above, you look at things effectively in 2D, because this is how you plan in real life. And you have to juggle, different zones, different combinations of structures. You have to think of how things are connected to each other, of how people move, of how people work. So all those things, even if we choose to disagree with the models, which is something that most planners would do anyway. Okay, those are like effectively, models based on Forrester's work, I think, to a great degree, but also some very, very simplistic, quite neoliberal takes on how cities work. But that's beyond the point. The thing is that you have a toy that feels very real, that feels very reactive to what you do, and also gives you a pretty solid idea of what planners are thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I mean, the fact that people suddenly found out what a land use is,
Mm.
and people in their millions, actually, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm very happy that it is. I would be irritated if someone, argued that we should introduce, I don't know, city skylines, or SimCity, the last one, in a curriculum for a university.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't agree with that. But in reality, I wouldn't agree with many of the simulation models that are around, but that's beyond the point. But I would be very, very happy for more of those games to be made.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say personally, I always bristle at the idea that there has to be a direct connection. The games have to be useful in that way. I think there's pressure on games that sometimes serve as metaphors for complex systems. I feel like sometimes it's external pressure that's like, oh, you should play this to help yourself professionally, as
Mm.
opposed to like, this can just be a fun system in which to engage in, and it does not need to lead to like some future career in like architecture or urban planning or whatever it might be. It just can be a thing that you do, and it does not need to be connected to something. There's this pressure to make games useful in that way,
Which
which I
makes no sense. It's like arguing, I don't know, like, what is Poe's poetry good for? I mean, where does it help us professionally and like practically? It doesn't. But it makes life worth living. It's those beautiful little things that entertain us, that make us feel things, make us think things that are not directly useful in some sort of perverted way, that everything has to be in the service of making more money and of supporting everything that's going on. No, things are just fun, just interesting, and that's wonderful.
yeah,
I don't. I mean, working in games, I don't feel the need to prove my usefulness to society. I
yeah,
think it's there. It's we make people have fun, so that's good.
yeah. Um, well, I did want to ask, Konstantinos, you brought this up, like, some of the philosophical ideas about what cities should be or how city systems should work are baked
Mhm.
into a game like SimCity.
Mhm.
I'm in a review of your book, Celine Nguyen in the Los Angeles Review of Books, talks about the ability of to see a system clearly as a precondition to manipulating it, and that in some ways a game like SimCity gives you all of this power, and that's part of the joy and the appeal. But it does also maybe have a bias towards like certain types of cities, like you can't raise the tax rate too high, or people will riot. Like there's kind of some of these, you can build lots of cities, but you can't build all of the cities. How much do you feel like it that matters? It seems like this is something you talk about in your book as well, like some of that tension between some of the ideas that are baked into the city versus like the desire for the game to just simply be playable. How important do you feel like some of these like critiques of the systems inside of a game like SimCity really matter
Yeah.
at the end of the day?
I mean, I guess it gets to that sort of intrinsic like pleasure we're talking about versus extrinsic like instrumental function of the city. And it also, yeah, it's interesting. I think about, I think I make the case that SimCity in some sense is sort of like, it's like it tries to have it both ways, and it makes us all sort of immune to these sort of critiques because it's like it's serious. But then if you like, I'm a serious living city, it's like I did some of the early there were early on, some of the newspaper reviews talked about like how professors were going to use it in their classes to teach with, right? And which may or may not, may or may not have been true. I don't know, right? But it's interesting that it's also, but at the same time, it's like you look at it too closely, and it's like, no, I'm just a game. There's the monster, like it's like I'm just a toy. So it's kind of like you can't, like it's slippery, right? And I think that's kind of part of it's like this brilliant rhetorical move. But I think to Konstantinos' point, I think that looking too closely at the model, I think the model is like should be critiqued. I think the most important thing is that the model invites us to reflect and think about it. I think that some people critique SimCity. I think Alan Kay has made this argument that SimCity sort of smuggles in all of this ideology, and you're kind of like being brainwashed in a sense when you play it and you're not aware of it. But I think that's a little bit, and perhaps that happens sometimes, but I think that what it really does, I think that actually part of that distancing that you get from it's a toy, it's a game, it's real, it's not, is that it makes you aware that it's a representation. And that fact that it can generate that attention means that it's making you aware of the model and the assumptions in it. So I think that the more sort of giving players more credit would say, and giving SimCity more credit would say, yeah, the model is limited in its perspective, as any model is going to be. But that fact that it's not presenting itself as authoritative and it's making you aware that it's a representation invites you to think about the model as a model and be aware that it's like, I think that's one of the actually key threads in Will Wright's work, is that he's very aware of the computer as a medium of representation. Like he's like I think a lot, like unlike a lot of the scientists whose work he's building on, they think like Jay Forrester thinks he's an engineer. He's got to solve the world's problems, right? Like he's got to, Will Wright is like, I'm going to use this to make a model that is definitely a representation in the computer. And so Will Wright seeing everything as materials for representation, like a filmmaker, right, or something like that, means that he, I think that's key to understanding his work.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really have it both ways. Like you can both argue and say that like, oh, SimCity is a forerunner to the popular, it's both a reflection of neoliberal thinking and the construction of cities, but at the same time, like you're able to summon tornadoes to just like completely wipe your city. I used to build like mountains with water flowing out of them so I could generate infinite hydroelectric. But like you can't have it, but I can't be both of those things simultaneously, which I think maybe, I don't know. It certainly like mutes the critique. I don't know, Konstantinos. What do you think?
I think that it's also. I mean, this is something that you probably don't think when thinking about something like SimCity, but it is something that was created, in the U.S. So I mean, from the moment you look at it, you sort of expect a specific, set of ideas, and even less in a less general manner, you also expect a specific type of urbanism. I mean, you sort of. That it's an American thing. Good. I mean, fine. They do things like that. Sorry.
So is City Skylines, is that the European? I'm just curious what the 1989 year, if SimCity in 1989, if Will Wright had been not in Silicon Valley but had been in Europe in 1980, what would it be? Yeah.
I cannot imagine, and this is a very interesting question. This is something that I had been thinking ever since we discussed with a friend, actually with a person who directed the Lake Game, and we had been discussing about a Mesoamerican city builder, right? And you have to take the historical context into account. So I mean, it makes sense for someone living in the US, so a country that has been expanding its urbanism and creating places ex novo for the duration of its existence, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense to start, on an empty field and start building stuff. It would be demented to teach someone in Europe that you'll just find, a nice open place and start building. No, you cannot. I mean, if I made like a European focused city game, I would start, with a pre-existing town, whether it's like Roman or Byzantine or medieval or whatever. There's already a tissue. There's something that is to be expanded, and perhaps, just drawing straight lines and creating grids might be part of it, but I would give people a way to sort of create a more Baroque plan depending on where they're playing, or a more the sinuous lines of City Skylines. They, even though they're there to allow us to create suburbs that feel more suburban, they are a very sensible addition. So depending on when you start from, you have to look at things differently. So, this being an American game, this being a game that comes, from a specific mode of thinking that's based on a specific set of models, it's fine. I mean, it's what one would expect, which is,
Yeah.
again, fantastic because it's a toy. I mean, I look at it as a toy. It's as if I go and critique my daughter that, the way you've arranged those Legos is authoritarian. I would
Yeah.
never do that. Well, I would, but not really.
I think that I'm just thinking that like I think that even what that brings up for me is that even SimCity, of course, not like it's like such a like SimCity has such a colonial, American ideology in it as well too, because there's of course there is no like ex novo either here, right? Like so,
there are no indigenous. There are no like space.
It's
There's
just
no indigenous.
it's like it was a very like settler orientation of and it's just this empty land that was just not being used very well, and so we're just gonna it's like
but what we're doing now is sort of. The thing is that we're assuming the assumptions. So we're sort of trying to find meaning where there is none in reality. I mean, I think that, and I'm certain that Chaim knows it better. I think that Will Wright actually found this fascinating little thing that he could sort of expand into something very convincing and created a toy out of it.
But I think it is. But I think it is a sorry. I think it is I think it does reflect a broadly held cultural blind spot of
it does. Yeah. But how could it not? I mean, this is. I mean, I sort of believe that it's very difficult unless you have, I don't know, unless you're a geographer who has been studying and thinking, or a historian. If you just are someone who just wants to look at things as they are, you usually don't go back. I mean, obviously the main ideology is reflected on you, but I don't think it's something that you think about doing. It's just something that sort of happens. It occurs.
Also, it's more fun to build on nothing, right? Like it's like SimCity did come with those
that's
scenarios, which are closer to what you're describing.
Right.
And no, it's just like that was just like that. Like who did that? Like it's way more fun to be Robert Moses, or maybe not Robert Moses, just build from scratch, right?
Oh, so you're telling me like a SimCity like Rome, where you're like just digging, like you're I have a friend who's in urban architecture, and it's just like there's some cities it's just extremely, London's one of these cities, it's extremely difficult to build things because of just the layers and layers of cultures and cities that have been there before you. You want to preserve those things. There's no particular like prehistory. I guess it just ends up functionally just becoming a different game where you're having to make stronger considerations, and that would make a different argument about what the natures of cities are. So that's just not the game that it is.
That's true.
That sounds like a really.
So I think that Chaim's idea that there's this game design demand to start with an empty field, that also makes sense. I mean, it's the same thing in Skylines.
I love the idea though of building a city builder where you start to dig and then immediately you find some stuff. So it's kind of like, it's like half city builder as we know it, but then half kind of like half archaeological dig, you're just, I dig here. That's like, like I'm just digging and I'm just finding all this cool stuff. And now I have to like improvise and work with it. So it's like, I'm not unearthing the landscape, but I'm
also a nucleus. I mean, when we were discussing this Mesoamerican city builder, the idea was that how was the average Maya city built? So you have the clergy and the leadership decide that this is where we're gonna build something, and the first thing you build is a temple and a palace and the ball court, and 5 things are always the same, and they're a given, and the way that the residences are arranged around those little plazas is also a given. And you have so many givens, and yet you have so many different places. And that would be interesting. I mean, give players a completely different way of thinking at things. It's like, I mean, you don't have taxation. This is a completely different thing. You don't have people who freely offer their labor. It's always very interesting to look at those options too, especially when it comes to city builders, because cities are also societies. I mean, they're not just shells.
Well, 1 or 2 more questions, and then we got some questions in chat also, which is great. We got a nice note from Will Oberliner, who said he was very glad that the ideology question is being brought up, and says, I think we Americans do not realize at times there are other models of cities and urbanism. Very thankful for the conversation. So thank you, Will, for that comment, and thank you, Konstantinos, for dropping that layer in. We have a question from Dennis, who actually triggers the next thing I want to talk. One of the last things I want to talk about was kind of like zooming back out from games and looking back at the real world, the built environment. Dennis has a question. What simulation tools do urban planners like actually use? Are any of them game-like in this way, or how do they manifest? I guess that might be a good question for you, Konstantinos.
Okay, so I mean, the main tool people are using all the time are GIS programs. So that's the main thing. So it's like it used to be ArcGIS, and now it's also QGIS, which is open source and free. Simulations are still up for debate, exactly due to the fact that they come with specific assumptions. I wouldn't say they're still the absolute mainstream.
Okay.
I mean, you would use a simulation for things like flooding and rainfalls and maybe even traffic. You would. I mean, you would have to find a way to generate trips, and there's usually nothing um, playful in those tools. It's that they're incredibly dull and very very high level. But yeah, there is. I have never seen anyone using anything vaguely similar to City Skylines or SimCity. It's okay. QGIS does have a special thing. Effectively, QGIS is a map combined with a database. That's what it is, and every GIS program is what it does. But yeah, usually you don't do that. You might have when you do that, you end up with things like, again, I don't want to sound nasty, but things like the line, if in Saudi Arabia, the thing that won't get built after all because it obviously would never get built. So I mean, if you start visualizing wonderful things,
not with that attitude, Konstantin.
I know, sorry, it's that. I mean, thinking about super cool stuff that looks fantastic is not the way to approach urban planning.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah. Well, I guess it's a good segue because Konstantinos, one of the things, just kind of the close things out. You've written about, you've talked about again, I didn't want to make it too. Games don't need to be didactic in this way. They have to teach people how to make things. However, you have done a bulk of your work is looking at things that cities can learn from games. One of the ones that jumped out at me was this idea of signposting techniques. So audio cues, color-coded hazard zones, environmental storytelling. You feel like those could actually improve how real cities communicate danger and guide navigation. Can you tell me, for you, like what's the most useful thing you think that games have maybe modeled that urban planners like haven't yet adopted?
I am thinking that since we also had the question by Dennis, if I remember correctly. I mean, the thing is that yes, we could use tools like Unity and Unreal to model things and have a rough idea of how they would look like. We could use pathfinding stuff to help us better design places for, say, people who walk or people who bike and maybe even people who drive. We can use those tools. They're very cool. But for transferable experience from the video game world to the actual world as a planning practice and not as a tool, I think that signposting and those sort of little things are more or less all that we can get. I feel that there's more to take from actual cities and pour back into games than there is from games to take and pour back into cities, with one notable exception. The thing is that games are very good at giving us an almost concrete look at what could be. So, I mean, if we're to discuss, utopia or new ways of organizing space, which we have a huge trouble imagining, it's very difficult to think of, a modern city without any cars, right? But this is something that you could create in a game. And if you create it in a game and you look at it and you experience it and you play in it, it suddenly doesn't seem that outlandish. So this is perhaps the most important thing we can achieve with games and the associated technology. Actually, allow people to get a taste of different approaches to urbanism that seem completely implausible right now.
Yeah. Well, I guess a Chaim question for you, someone who's looked at city building games and simulation games. Is there something that you've seen in games that you would love to see implemented in your city, even if the direction seems to be from the real world into games?
I mean, it's such a great provocation. I don't, yeah, it really is. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking about, a project I'm working on with with a client right now that's about sort of understanding like place in a way that's more than just the urban environment, but also sort of the deep history, deep time, sort of the broader geographic context and colonial history. And I'm just thinking about like, yeah, you could have like this like tricorder like device, with you that could just kind of tell you a lot more about a place. Like I live near a big cemetery, Frederick Olmsted Cemetery, and it's like there's a lot of people buried there, but also like some very notable people buried there. And I've like for years I've been like, man, it'd be great to have an overlay, like to kind of help me make sense of some of these stories. Because there's always like this like a story in a nutshell. It's like someone with a particular name, like a very Celtic tombstone, like just like a dates that are very old. And you kind of like, oh, this person was born in Germany or Ireland and they were born here and died here and this is their partner. And it's like there's all these stories. It's like thick with stories, but it's not, but like I don't know, I guess maybe that's where I'm going, is like the game thinking could maybe get us more of that in touch with where we actually are in space.
Yeah,
This sounds like a fascinating idea, to be honest, right? I mean, imagine being able to actually have all this data and sort of present it in a meaningful way to people who want to. That would be gloriously counterproductive, which is a fantastic thing to think. It would be very, very. I'm thinking, Guy Debord, like, you don't just walk around the city; you also discover, the immense depth to its stories, which would be fantastic.
yeah, getting that the quotidian layers of a city, just everyday interactions from times past. Well, I have one last question, and then if anybody else has any questions in chat, please leave them. One last question for you all. I live here in Los Angeles, and one of the newest entrants to our built environment has been Waymo's. Konstantinos put his head in his hand. I believe you have those in the Bay Area as well. It is very possible that the self-driving car is going to change how cities are organized. So you can see a world where, parking disappears or road widths shift or, the pedestrian space expands because you need less lanes. I was curious, if you're doing a little bit of prognostication, how long before do you think something like that would filter how game designers depict urban space? And I don't know, are there any assumptions that you think that maybe the self-driving car exposes about the cities that we've been building in games for, the last, 40, 50 years?
Chaim, would you like to go first, please?
Yeah, well, so I live in Oakland. Those cars are all over San Francisco. Whenever I go there, I'm just feel like just like any other tourist. I'm just like, whoa. But also my feeling, there's also like a lot of Teslas around, where I live, and after that I have one too. It's like I'm like terrified of them because I know like people are using them in this sort of self-driving mode of some kind, and like it's like fine for most of the time, but some of the time doesn't actually understand what's going on, and it's the edge cases that are hard and the edge cases that make reality and not a computer game. But I think that I'm looking at that monster, that photograph there. I'm just thinking like it feels like such a. First of all, I'm sure it must be a very American idea. And second, it feels also like it's like somehow it's like extrapolating forward from like our transportational logic in the United States of the car. But it's like, what if all of that technology that is festooning that thing that is already is like a total abomination was actually not just like extrapolating forward, but was like refactored. So I'm much more excited about like, actually you see around Berkeley campus, there was these cute little robots that were like this big and had little like animated faces on them, but they would like deliver food. You see them kind of scurrying around like downtown and around campus. And I don't know and I think they were probably actually operated by human beings, so that I read. But like, I think about like, yeah, you could have so many little devices that were not, threats to people's life and limb, there's kind of a skirting around, like a little thing that follows me. It's almost like Star Wars. I think about little like droids kind of we're sharing the sidewalk on the street, and they're not like menacing everyone's life as much. And it could be like helping an old lady carry the groceries, or, helping me, I don't know, just like, or you see people in those little, like, you see those where you guys live, the people, this is just like a Bay Area thing, people like on their little, like one wheel, like a electronic, like a
unicycle.
It's like and they're in the street. There's just all these other ways to deploy the changes in like motors, batteries, sensor technologies. There's like so many other configurations possible. So my hope is that it just lets us make an urban landscape which is less
yeah. I mean, it's very possible. It doesn't have to be a self-driving car. It could be a self-driving bicycle or rickshaw or some other mobility device. It doesn't have to be a Jaguar.
And again, I mean, if you think about it, what is this thing? I mean, besides being cool, I mean, I would like to see the design lifted and placed in a game. That would be very interesting. Good. It's futuristic enough and also familiar enough to work. Fantastic. Other than that, this is at best a taxi. That's it. I mean, it doesn't do anything else. We've like even invested like millions and billions of imaginary or real money into recreating something that exists, that's either automatically driven, which is not necessarily a good idea, or driven by someone from far away. Good. What does it change? I don't think this will change anything. What would change anything would be to actually invest in proper mass transportation. Like you have trams, you have subways, you have even bus lines. And I mean, if you visit, say, Geneva, which is obviously not the average city in the world, I mean, there's an affluence there that really helps it do anything. But public transportation is completely free for everyone, and you can see a city without cars because people rarely use them. There's no need to. And in order for this to work, you have to, on one hand, support public transportation and give people options and make it really good, and on the other hand, discourage cars. You have to be active in that, and if you do that, then you change the city. And this is something that, despite the many things that are incredibly wrong in Europe, this is something that has been achieved to a great degree, at least in medium-sized cities. I cannot see how, trying to reimagine the high-speed train as something like the thing that Elon Musk was thinking about, which boggles the mind in its cretinism. We will have a cube with things that go fast in it, and they will move from station to station. Yes, this is a train. This is a really fast train. We have those. We don't need the cube. I imagine that it looks cool to his infant-like brain, but am I being too nasty? Yes, I am. I will stop now. Sorry. I get carried away when we talk about actual cities because they matter more than game cities. Sorry.
To be clear, my question was about games. Just so I'm clear.
You're right.
Well, I could bring it to games. I realize there's a funny connection here, which is that apparently this is like this inversion. Apparently, to train those self-driving cars, they actually build virtual game worlds that then the AI plays repeatedly, and that's what they because it's much cheaper to have the simulator logic, like to train the system on virtual environments. And so there are people who and I have a colleague who went after EA went to one of these companies, and his job, he's an artist, was building the models, building games for AIs to play. He's basically building the virtual reality to train the autonomy software, which is totally blows my mind.
The question though is, what type of AI is that? I mean, are those like LLM or like neural networks?
I don't know, but I know that Tesla switched. They say they switched from a full explicit C++ stack, all this vision logic and autonomy logic, to they switched to a neural stack, which much more
because neural makes more sense when it comes to actually modeling stuff very, very specifically.
I think also from the perceptual to the action. So it's it's kind of so more opaque but more better. I don't know.
Cool.
But also we have to say that the gameplay possibilities of a self-driving whatever are immense. This is something that can be hacked. This is something that can go haywire. This is something that can be used as a narrative device or a gameplay device in a variety of. There was a game actually. Oh come on, it's called something Legion, where you play in
That's okay.
where you actually get to hack the city. I mean, you play in a city with thousands of NPCs. They all have their data in a hackable database, and you can hack, streetlights, you can hack cars, you can hack everything. And this is very interesting again when it comes to pure game design and not actual cities, because it gives you an incredibly new and unexpected layer of interaction.
Dogs, Dennis.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I remember this via the phone, and
yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. That's the one. Exactly, and that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And
well, one last question. Let's see. We've got a little show question button on here. Let's see if that works. Oh, look at that. That's very cool. All right.
That's very cool. That's I'm impressed.
My first time, look, it makes it look like a tweet. It's like a tweet that's inside. The question from Milton is like in a nutshell is basically, Konstantinos, you mentioned like that, SimCity is a game is built by an American in American context, and it bakes some ideas about what city should be from an American context. We are in an era where the center, the center, we're moving into a world where maybe American power, not maybe, but like American power or the perception of American power is shifting. America is not the center, quote unquote, the center of the universe. And so Milton's question is like, with shifting power relations, how might that change what we understand game spaces to be? I mean, I think to your point, Konstantinos, like, could you imagine if like the center of like the most popular game, city building game in the world was not made in, it's not made in California. It was made in, let's say it was made in Mumbai, or it was made in Shanghai, or in another city. Yeah. How would that maybe change what we think about?
I think it would be different. I cannot imagine how. I cannot exactly imagine how, because I mean, my perception of like what Chinese cities are is, this, the fragments of memories, touristy ones. I mean, not actual perception of how the city works, but that would be very interesting, and that would have to be very different. And I imagine that it would appeal to people who are not, in the US or Europe much more.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. And I imagine that this is something that, will happen. And I do include, Western Asia and China and India, which is, I mean, I've been watching a lot of Indian movies lately, and I've discovered that I prefer this type of, cinematography to what we have nowadays in the wider West. And it's very different if you think about it.
Yeah.
And I imagine that games would be like that too. I think I see those huge Chinese games on Steam, which they're completely opaque. And I cannot play them, but they must do something very different, and that would be very, very interesting. And I would say to the benefit of everyone, actually.
Yeah. There you go. One last note. A bunch of years ago, I heard the head of product for Netflix speak at a conference, and he did a little closed door session. And one of the things he talked about was, and this is maybe like 10 years ago. So he talked about Netflix was in Narcos, when they started showing Narcos, and they were finding that actually there were more Americans who were watching Narcos with subtitles, even though they don't speak Spanish, and that they were starting to see this influence, basically that this unwillingness by particularly like American audiences to watch like foreign films, like quote unquote foreign films, was starting to loosen. And so you see that now with Netflix, they have shows from like all around the world. And yet had this idea that like Netflix's job was to create what you call taxonomies of taste. This idea that your tastes and interests you might have more in common with someone on the other side of the globe in terms of your taste than the person next door to you. And so their job was to create these like little pockets where you could allow, and it's been interesting. I wonder, maybe that is a byproduct of like a global games audience, is that you could allow for people to find city builders that are maybe more reflective, or just using city builders as an example. City builders are more reflective of the, their point of view in a way that, in the 80s, you only had what was available at, I'm trying to think, name a computer, a computer game store from the 80s, I guess.
Electronics Boutique.
Yeah, that is exactly the one I was thinking. Exactly. But yeah, you'd have more options.
But this is a very interesting notion, actually. I mean, the fact that some tastes might be global, and there might be different groupings that we haven't quite found out
Yeah.
yet. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. This was like a wonderful conversation. I had like, 6 other slides that we could have gone down. I had a NAFTA slide. I had a NAFTA slide. We had we sort of alluded to it, but then we kind of buzzed through it. Anyway, thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate it. For everybody who attended, thank you so much. I really, really thank everybody who sat with us today. I love doing conversations like this, and obviously getting people with like different perspectives on the same idea is a lot of fun. All right, thank you all both. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Okay,
thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Chaim.
bye.